US Central Command certainly relieved that very few southern oil wells have been set alight, although British forces said earlier that practically all Iraq's oil and gas fields have either been mined or booby-trapped. But making them safe and shepherding growing numbers of POWs are apparently not slowing down the advance north, an advance which seemed to be welcome in the southern town of Safwan, where locals helped tear down posters of Saddam for foreign TV cameras, but wanted to know when aid would arrive.
Welcome to the soldier, British and soldier USA. But where is the helping? No helping. Anything helping? Food, missing, nothing, any helping.
These are the latest pictures from Basra tonight. British troops at a checkpoint outside the city after what the Americans are calling a big military victory. Despite earlier Allied claims that they'd surrendered, elements of Iraq's 51st Mechanized Division carried on fighting. Resistance on the battlefield proving far stiffer than many had expected.
We've taken two of these key bridges. Now, the whole area is dominated by these two rivers, which is the Tigris in the top and the Euphrates at the moment. That will now govern the whole of the way the rest of the campaign works. The area between them is very fertile and is very heavily populated, lots of roads there too. And that will govern the campaign. And the way that Baghdad is being defended, which is where they're heading for next, is by this ring of defences around Baghdad. And that's where you've been seeing this smoke that Lindsay Hilson was talking about earlier on. This was filmed earlier today from the motorway heading north out of Baghdad. According to Al Jazeera, this is canisters of oil that have been put beside the motorway which have been set alight. If we go back to the map, you can see that what will happen now is that they will come into contact with the Republican Guard, who have been brought back to the centre of Baghdad. Two unit divisions, one to the north defending and to the west defending the roads there, and two in key towns to the south and west. So the way the campaign will go now is probably with a two-pronged attack, going up through the populated area by road and coming round to the west on the desert, where they can drive at high speed over the hard sand.
Well, we're about 30 kilometres from Nasiriyah, John, and I've been told this afternoon that 2,000 Iraqi soldiers have already surrendered there today. The latest information we have from there is that 2 batteries of guns are still firing in that area, and that there are also 2 tanks which are still operational. Those 2 tanks, we are told by US forces on the ground here, have taken up positions by a hospital where I'm told the Iraqi command post is. So Nasiriyah has not yet fallen, is the information I'm getting, but it is probably not far off doing so. So many people have surrendered there.
Any word of casualties?
No, we've had no word of casualties from there, or indeed from anywhere else. We have been travelling since I spoke to you yesterday evening. We've been travelling through the night and all day today. There's still a lot of armour coming down the road where we are. If we spin the camera around, I think you may be able to see some of that armour as it approaches us, driving past the MLRS, that's the rocket launcher unit that we've been travelling with. All of this kit is still heading on the road north, as indeed are we. Those are, if I'm not mistaken, if you can still hear me, those are Bradley armoured fighting vehicles. Inside those there are infantrymen who will ride into battle, and they all hop out the back, do their thing and hop in again. They're a very mobile force and very well suited to the sort of terrain. And
Iraqis armed with RPGs or rocket-propelled grenades are somewhere in the area, somewhere I think to the west of us, judging by the way that all the soldiers here have suddenly taken cover and taken up firing positions, and the atmosphere has, which until now has been very relaxed, has suddenly become somewhat more tense. We've also just started hearing explosions coming from somewhere to the north of us, which someone tells me who knows more about these things than I do, sounds like an airstrike rather than artillery or tank fire. He thought it might have been cluster bombs coming down on an enemy position. So we're certainly within earshot of some sort of a front line here.
Distance during the past 2-3 hours, I've heard some thumps of artillery, and I know there are skirmishes going on. but most of the Iraqi army here seem to me to have faded away, and therefore the Americans are saying essentially they control the city. They don't have troops in the city, but they have outposts around it.
Would you say that Nasiriyah is, rather than being strategically important in itself, is in effect a staging post on the way to Baghdad?
Well, I think it is important psychologically because certainly the people around here, and I think the Iraqi military, from what one hears, did not expect so soon after this war started to find American armor on their doorstep. So that is important. But I think secondly, of course, getting that bridge over the Euphrates means that American forces can move on Baghdad either from the west or from the east. And they were very fearful those bridges would be blown, and therefore they are very, very pleased that they've got here in time and now have those options if and when they move on to Baghdad. Last night, the unit I was with seized the airfield just outside of Nasiriyah.
Bridge into the city, and British officials say most Iraqi units appear to have pulled out. The Americans have said they've no plans to move into Basra and instead are pressing on to Baghdad.
Our troops are performing as we would expect, magnificently. And indeed, the outcome is not in doubt. There may well be tough days ahead.
While the weapons of the US 3rd Infantry are formidable, their progress hasn't been entirely smooth. 4 American soldiers are thought to have been killed in combat around Nasiriyah, a crossing point on the Euphrates River. It was one of a number of skirmishes.
Today's targets were based on the enemy artillery and rocket fires. They were shooting at our ground forces, so we fired in to suppress and destroy their artillery and their rocket fires before they can shoot back at our troops.
Nasiriyah has now been secured. The coalition leaders won't say these cities have fallen, partly because they haven't, but also because the advance is the priority and the encumbrance of taking prisoners would cause delay.
There are Iraqi units that are preparing to surrender, even now as we speak. These are lines of roughly 700 Iraqi soldiers that we've imaged in the desert, away from their equipment, awaiting our arrival.
The Americans say between 1,000 and 2,000 have been taken prisoner, but others have been allowed simply to go home. Because the advance has been rapid, the Americans say the Iraqis were only able to sabotage 9 of the region's 500 oil wells. The Iraqis, for their part, deny setting any alight. Further attack, the Iraqi military had filled ditches with oil, which today they set alight. And one aged anti-aircraft missile was spotted on the back of a truck. On the coalition side, the day had dawned with another tragic accident. 2 Royal Navy seeking helicopters like these collided in mid-air. One had been going on a surveillance mission from the Ark Royal, the other was returning. 6 British crew and 1 American were killed. And in northern Iraq, an Australian journalist and 3 Kurdish fighters were the victims of a suicide bomber near the town of Halabja. Meanwhile, in the south of the country tonight, a 3-person ITN crew are missing. They were heading towards Basra when they came under fire. Tonight, there are more bombing raids on Iraq. These are F-18s taking off from the USS Constellation in the Gulf.
Been a sideshow compared to the massive aerial attacks on Baghdad or Kirkuk, but for those who live in these mountains, it was just as terrifying. Late last night through to early this morning, first US cruise missiles and then an aerial bombardment hammered into the mountains.
Last night, shortly after midnight, the Islamic outposts came under heavy bombardment. We heard loud explosions. They were in the Ansar area over there.
The area under attack had been controlled by Islamic groups that included Ansar, linked by the US to Al-Qaeda and at war with the Kurdish authorities. There was shooting as the forces of the Kurdish regional government advanced slowly towards the little town of Kamal and other villages in the Islamic area. The local population had fled, but it was not known if there were still gunmen hiding here. The main road to Halabja has been out of their control for months, but now at last they could move their equipment freely. An attack here up in the mountains had been expected ever since Colin Powell told the Security Council that Ansar were linked both to Saddam and to Al-Qaeda and had been using the area to develop poisons and chemical weapons. Ansar denied it, of course, and only last month invited Newsnight up to the mountains to see for ourselves. Up on the Ansar mountain, we were shown the complex that Colin Powell had described to the UN Security Council as a poison and explosives training camp. We were told it was a media centre.
It's a media place, and you can find out for yourselves whether it's a media place or a place used for military purposes or a chemical weapons factory.
But we noted it was guarded with barbed wire and warning signs with skull and crossbones. This complex was, of course, targeted last night. Down in the village of Kermal, under the control of a different Islamic group, we'd met a group of elders in the mosque. They were worried that the photo Powell had shown the UN included the word Kermal and that they'd be attacked.
You can see for yourselves. We don't even have a car to escape.
These are their days to shine. This is the second night of the shock and awe campaign, and we come to you from an air base near the border of Iraq. The precise location we can't tell you because of Pentagon rules that allow us to live and work here. But we can tell you this base is extremely busy. At times the taxiways look like Newark or LAX airport on a very busy Friday night. But instead of 727s taxiing down the runway, you have fighters and attackers with bombs and missiles waiting to go down the runway to head north towards Iraq. Behind us, some of the aircraft that are here, these are the A-10 Warthogs. These are attack planes that provide close air support for the troops that are on the ground in Iraq. Some of these planes just arrived. Some will be pulling out shortly, but a short time ago, we talked with one of the pilots of the Warthogs who just came back from a mission to Iraq.
I was sent to a particular location in Iraq near the city of Nasiriyah and worked with many other airplanes, A-10 Thunderbolts, and ground troops. And our number one job is to keep our ground troops safe that are on the ground and make sure that their way is clear as they move forward.
What kind of ammunition do you carry? What armaments? What kind of bombs and missiles?
The A-10 is built around a 7-barrel Gatling gun. It carries 30-millimeter bullets. We carry almost any flavor of bombs you can imagine, and infrared and electro-optical Mavericks.
On this mission, you don't always use them. Did you use them on this mission?
On most missions we don't, but on this mission I cleaned off the jet, so to speak. We found a military compound that had not surrendered, and after 30 to 40 minutes of very significant delays to ensure that there was no collateral damage and that the target was positively identified, there were no friendlies or any non-combatants in the area. We were given permission to engage and destroy.
US and British troops engaging Iraqi forces this afternoon in the western outskirts of Basra. Their tanks superior in range, firepower and armour, with the lethal advantage of air support from US attack helicopters. One conclusion seemed inevitable. By nightfall, Allied forces claimed victory and the taking of hundreds of prisoners.
On the move towards Iraq's second city, Basra, today, but military commanders insisted they had no intention of taking it by force. The strategy is to isolate Basra, hoping that Iraqi soldiers based there will simply give up. That wasn't the case in nearby Qasr. The route into it is littered with the evidence of battle. Discarded weapons were piled up beside the road. Some civilians caught in the fighting were fleeing in panic. But US Marines who went into combat here were given a rapturous reception by people overjoyed to be liberated from the rule of Saddam Hussein.
No good. Saddam Hussein, no good. No good. No good.
At Qasr's vital deep-water port, there were British Marines at the waterfront, American soldiers posing for snapshots under a portrait of Saddam, and Iraqi prisoners lining up to be taken away to a POW camp.
There have been some who surrender immediately. They have put up some resistance, but it has been relatively easy to overcome.
US Marines fought here under British command, and many said resistance was stiffer than they'd expected. Military commanders say they don't want to get drawn into urban warfare here and want to cause as little civilian collateral damage as possible. But if bigger towns than Qasr put up a fight, that may mean that this campaign will take a lot longer than they had hoped. Blazing oil wells are another sign of Iraqi defiance. But the Allies say only 7 wells out of hundreds have been sabotaged, and the southern oil fields have been taken intact. In one small town, American soldiers tore down a picture of Saddam. He has not yet capitulated, but the territory he controls is shrinking fast. Tim Ewart, ITV News, southern Iraq.
Is in turmoil, and its coastline and oil fields are in the hands of the Royal Marines. They have spearheaded a daring invasion, not without cost, and tonight it is they and not Saddam Hussein who control vast swathes of this land. Today, 4-2 Commando Royal Marines took up the attack by day, pushing further north and fighting Iraqi troops.
Since yesterday, there have been hundreds of sorties that have originated from here. The planes leave here, they fly to Iraq, and they come back here. Behind us, you can see some of the planes that are being used here. These are the A-10 attack Warthogs. Now, these planes are used to provide air support for the ground troops that are in Iraq right now. They fly from 1,000 feet to 30,000 feet above them to provide the support. Sometimes they drop their ammunition if necessary. Most of the time, they do not. We can tell you that this is the largest fighter and attacker wing base being used in this war. There are 30 air bases being used in 12 different countries in the Persian Gulf area. This is one of them. They can survive direct hits from armor-piercing explosives and projectiles. Now, some of our most loyal CNN viewers may remember a few months ago we did some live reports from the Army ammunition plant in McAlester, Oklahoma. That particular plant makes literally all the non-nuclear bombs the United States uses. So for us being here, after being there and seeing the bombs all here, after seeing them made, is really quite an experience.
Aboard this aircraft carrier and 2 others in the Persian Gulf here aboard the USS Constellation. It was at about this time last night when the first strike packages that went into the vicinity of Baghdad were coming back. Right now we are in the hangar bay, and I just wanted to show you some of the activity that is going on here. This is an EA-6B Prowler, one of the radar jamming aircraft that the squadrons here were pleased with the performance of this aircraft because a testament to its performance was, in their view, that no one was shot down and all of the aircraft from the original strike packages returned safely to the deck. Earlier today, just hours after the first strike packages were returned and back here on the aircraft carrier, the munitions bombs were being loaded onto jets that would be flying off this aircraft carrier later. Those munitions including precision weapons, the laser-guided weapons, the GPS satellite-guided weapons. The squadron members, the aircrew members that we talked to who flew into Iraq say they were very pleased with the precision weapons and how they work. They believe these precision weapons limit the casualties to non-combatants. They feel that they are at least attempting to have a 0 non-combatant rate, but they are also realistic, as General Tommy Frank said today during his briefing. Non-combatants will always be killed in war. We can also tell you that as flight operations were underway last night, that the first strikes into Baghdad were being flown by pilots who have flown into Iraq before as part of Southern Watch. They were flying the no-fly zones in Southern Watch beginning in mid-December, and they just simply turned the corner. They had not flown into the above the 33rd parallel until last night, and last night is when they left this carrier deck and flew above the 33rd as the airplane got underway off of this aircraft carrier and others. Finally, in addition to the airstrikes that took place from the aircraft carriers and the land-based air assets, some Tomahawk cruise missiles, a great number of Tomahawk cruise missiles were launched into Iraq. Rear Admiral Barry Costello, the Constellation Battle Group commander, says that every ship or submarine, U.S. Navy ship or submarine capable of firing Tomahawks last night participated in firing Tomahawks. That's 30-plus ships.
British and American forces are rolling towards Basra, Iraq's second city, a major prize before the biggest of them all, Baghdad. The Allied troops have come here to get rid of Saddam Hussein, even if it's only his picture. Very soon, they believe, they'll be bringing down the man himself. More and more of Iraq is now in the hands of the Allies. Places like the poor and dusty settlement of Safwan. Here, there's quiet delight that people are now living in a post-Saddam world.
Very happy to get Saddam Hussein.
We've been waiting a long time to get rid of Saddam Hussein, says this man. It's good to see him go. Before he falls from power, Saddam has ordered the destruction of Iraq's oil wells, the country's most precious asset. So far, though, only a handful have been ignited and far fewer than had been feared. Today, we flew in with the RAF to the southern Iraqi port of Qasr. There's been fierce fighting here between US Marines and Iraqi troops. But now the Americans chat casually, right in front of Saddam Hussein. They say they're in charge here, though a few of his soldiers disagree and they're still holding out. American and British commanders say they are now in control of Qasr, but it hasn't been quick and it hasn't been easy. There are still isolated pockets of Iraqi resistance, and opposition from Iraqi troops in this town has been much more ferocious than had been expected. And the Marines told me some Iraqi soldiers are now pretending to be civilians.
There is a little bit more resistance than we've expected, and there are also some fanatics who will remove their uniforms and become masquerade as civilians and still shoot at us.
Is that pretty dangerous for you guys?
It's always dangerous. Dangerous for you as well.
An armada of dinghies appears in the port. They're British Royal Marine commandos ferrying in a human cargo. Dozens of captured Iraqis. For these men, the war is over, almost before it's begun. They're lined up on the beach of Qasr, a sad, bedraggled bunch with no shoes and hands tied behind their backs. The wounded get treatment by Royal Marine medical teams. Not far from here, more Iraqi prisoners are guarded by the Royal Irish Regiment. British troops seem to look after them well, feeding them with self-heating army ration packs.
Well, the prisoners have been placed into a holding area. So far they've been given water, and they've also been given rations, and they'll be given this throughout the day as well.
So the collapse of the Iraqi army has begun, but these troops in the south are mainly conscripts. Nearer Baghdad, they're much tougher, and it may be a different story. Ben Brown, BBC News, Southern Iraq.
The battle for Nasiriyah began yesterday afternoon with the Americans firing salvos of rockets towards Iraqi forces. The Americans pushed their tanks to within 7 kilometers of the city, but despite a strong bombardment, Iraqi regular troops refused to give up. During the night, Bravo Company 269 Armour broke away to attack the nearby airbase at Talil. They called in powerful airstrikes before moving in. By first light, the troops were searching the base. There were skirmishes, but most of the Iraqis had faded away. The airbase was a warren of bunkers, and tanks were used to open sealed doors. It was thought that this might be a hiding place for weapons of mass destruction, but nothing was found here. This morning, the battle around Nasiriyah was rejoined with tank busters being used to attack Iraqi armor.
There hasn't been a large capitulation. It's been small pockets of fighting that are dealt with quickly and efficiently.
Today, American troops were able to secure the vital bridges across the Euphrates.
Here on the outskirts of Nasiriyah, American forces have parked their tanks right in front of an image of Saddam Hussein. They are still meeting some resistance from Iraqi forces, but they expect to have the city under total control within 24 hours.
The Americans insist they are meeting their targets. That is mainly due to the speed of their initial advance from Kuwait. For 10 hours, parts of the 3rd Infantry Brigade had charged across the desert in a formation 4 kilometers wide. This was hard, relentless driving, taking the column 120 miles deep inside Iraq.
Never has a mechanized force moved so fast and so far.
Speed matters, and the Americans are determined to finish this controversial war next week. Gavin Hewitt, BBC News, Nasiriyah, Iraq.
There were lines of Iraqi soldiers waiting to surrender. He also produced video of attacks by special forces. It all gave an impression of Allied action and Iraqi collapse. But as to real facts, well, there weren't many.
Bad today, not the result of coalition fire this time, but of Saddam's own regime, apparently lighting oil-filled trenches that surround the city. It was probably supposed to confuse U.S. missiles. It didn't. By nighttime, the skies were dark again, with the smoke from burning buildings this time that were struck by U.S. cruise missiles. Missiles that definitely were not confused.
Let's take a look at a wide picture, wide map of the region, showing us a good portion of Kuwait and Iraq. I want to start in the right-hand corner, which is a Basra region, and let's talk about the U.S. Marines and British troops there and what we know about where they are and what they did.
What we know, Miles, is the U.S. and British forces crossed the border from Kuwait. They were accompanied by apparently an air assault and maybe a naval operation to take the oil rigs and the oil pumping station at Qasr. But the British Marines, the British forces seem to have been on the right flank. The Marines seem to have been on the left flank. The Marines took the oil fields, the part of the Ramallah fields near Basra. They secured the airfield. They began destroying vehicles. They met some tough resistance from some hard-nosed Iraqi security elements inside Basra. They backed off after securing the bridges, and the British forces have been left to negotiate the surrender of Basra while the Marines have regrouped and are preparing to head north toward Baghdad.
All right, that gives you that right-hand quadrant there. Let's talk about some of the heavy armor here. They started right about here. Where do we know about where this heavy cavalry unit is right now, General?
Well, it's been released that they're somewhere up near on Nasiriyah.
Which is right about there.
And we believe that they have secured, one of the elements of that division has secured the bridge over the Euphrates River there. Now, where they go from there, of course, is speculative. We don't have any knowledge of the plans, but it is about halfway to Baghdad. And they're clearly putting pressure on the Iraqi defensive elements there.
All right, now let's move a little bit further over to the left here. We'll give you a sense of an airborne unit, the 101st Airborne specifically. You could give us a sense of where we think they may be.
Well, what we know of the 101st Airborne right now is that at least one brigade has been moving in trucks and in Humvees up probably to the west flank of the 3rd Infantry Division, probably moving up toward those captured air bases at H2 and H3.
That would put them right up in there, right? And then
probably not there yet. But
they're not there yet, but where would they go from there? Probably straight into the north and straight to Baghdad?
Probably would be the force in the north. There's got to be a way to get that northern element in there, and as you know, the 4th Infantry Division has been officially pulled off the mission of going through Turkey to come in from the north.
All right, let's move the map down now to Nasiriyah, because you were telling me some interesting things about armor doctrine. In other words, the rules of engagement, according to the U.S. Army, on how you move armor. In this case, what you do when you come to a river and how you deal with bridges. Give us a sense of what happened on the ground here, General.
Well, we know that there was some resistance from the Iraqis there, that the forces that we put on the ground did not do a tank charge or World War II-style infantry assault to try to overrun the Iraqi forces. Instead, using our superior firepower and communications, we put artillery fire on, and when that didn't loosen them up, we brought in A-10s, and we've heard already today from some of the A-10 pilots who flew that mission. And they were successful in breaking the resistance, and apparently we've moved at least some elements of the 3rd Infantry Division across the Euphrates. Now, we don't know whether the whole division will go across or whether the division will split and go up on both sides of the Euphrates, but at some point, to get to Baghdad, you got to get across the Euphrates.
So it's possible you might have tanks going up both sides of that riverbank. What's the reason behind all that?
You might, because you might get greater depth. On the other hand, you could also make the argument in classic military strategy, never allow a river to split your avenue of approach. So it can be played either way, and we just don't know, and that's the commander's call.
All right, one